Okay, we're going to be looking at Trek Form 49-1, Addendum concerning right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. I'll start with a little bit of history here. This addendum was originally um, developed for the purpose of a buyer who puts a large down payment, that they could still have a form to fill out that would give them an option to terminate if the house didn't appraise. And the reason they needed that is if you're putting a large down payment, let's say the house is 600,000, you're putting $300,000 down, the house could not appraise, but you would still meet underwriting requirements. So you would not have an out by the third party financing addendum. This form gives you different options to have an out. So that was one of the main reasons this was developed. Now, as we all know, when we got into a crazy seller's market, this form got used in a lot of other manners, and we're going to go over those today, of the pluses and minuses to both buyers and sellers, and what the options are that you pick down there. Now, one thing to point out right away, though, at top here, this is only to be used with the third-party financing addendum attached, but it is not to be used with FHA and VA financing. So that was a common mistake early on in this form, but it's not. We won't get into other options for those types of loans, but for this form, it's just for conventional loans. Pretty straightforward here concerning the property at. You're putting the address in there. That's easy. Again, financing described in the third-party financing addendum. Property does not involve, and you see they put it again here because they knew that that was going to be an issue, that people were going to try to use that. So again, cannot be used on those two types of financing. And then we'll start with your options here. So number one is pretty straightforward, is just a complete waiver. So obviously the seller is going to love that, right? They don't have to worry about the appraisal any longer. That wipes out any out on the third party financing as it pertains to appraisal. Now, obviously with your buyer, yes, it makes his offer more competitive, but also there's risk involved in that. So regardless of what the property appraises for, they're going to have to bring that extra cash if it would not appraise for the sales price. So you want to make sure if you do have a buyer that's doing that, you make sure that they're well aware of that is going to occur if that property does not appraise. Number two is similar to that, except now it's just a partial waiver, and you're going to waive your right to terminate on the third party financing, but you're going to add an additional right, and it's going to be based on a value you pick, not necessarily the sales price. It can be the sales price. It probably wouldn't make a lot of sense to be the sales price, because then you wouldn't really need this form. So basically, the way this was used very commonly was that, let's say you had a house and your sales price was 400,000, but you're saying like, hey, I'm willing to eat some of the money if the house doesn't appraise, because I really love this house, I really want this house. So as long as it appraises for 375, I'm good to move forward. So that's very common use of this form. It protects your buyer in that they only have that 25,000 in my example that they might have to come up with. Still is a positive thing to the seller, because now the house doesn't have to appraise for the full price. It has to just appraise for the price that they put in section 2 there. So commonly used, and just that gives the buyer a little bit more protection than when you're talking number one, it could be any amount, where here you're going to cap that by putting a value in there. Then we have number 3, which is additional right to terminate. So this is one that would be used in that original example I told you about, why this form was developed. So if you had a high cash down payment, in my example before, it was like 50%. So 600,000, you're putting $300,000 down. If it doesn't appraise, you still meet underwriting requirements. So technically you wouldn't have an out on the third party financing. So you would come here and you would do the additional right to terminate. One thing that's very important if you do that is this number of days here. You got to remember that's when you're going to may terminate within those many days, but it's based on the appraisal. So you have to make sure you put enough days in there that you're going to have the appraisal back. So depending on how appraisals are running, you're going to want a minimum 20, maybe 25, maybe even 30 in there, because you need to get the appraisal back. If the appraisal's not back, then this wouldn't apply any longer if you went past those days. Now you could extend it and that type thing, but you want to make sure as a buyer's agent you put as many days as you can in there, As a seller's agent, you would want to somewhat limit that, because if you put 30 days and the closing was 30 days, basically you're right up till close that they can terminate. Although a lot of appraisal terminations are pretty close to the closing date. The rest of this works pretty similar to the option number 2. You're going to put an amount in there. So again, that's going to help limit or give the buyer an option to terminate if it doesn't appraise for that amount. It also can have some benefit still to the seller if it's an amount that's less than the sales price. So that's basically everything on that form. If you have any questions, like always, contact me, but hopefully that gives you a good idea on how to use that form and how it affects buyers and sellers. Thank you.